Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If you haven't noticed, the average Star Wars citizen is suffering from a severe issue. They're not concerned with epic battles between the dark and light side of the Force. They're not overwhelmed by the eternal struggle between democracy and tyranny, or the political fight between different factions within the New Republic government. No, what the average citizen living in this galaxy is concerned about is bandits. Bandits who just roll into town and start shooting up the place. Bandits who have a cultural heritage in raiding, enslaving, and pillaging. Bandits who like putting starships on Duracrete blocks and stripping all of their useful parts and selling them on the secondhand markets. And we also have bandits who like to steal full ships or board other ships in space and try to take all of another person's stuff. There are bandits that ride speeder bikes to rob hovering trains. There are bandits who live off of thriving settlements like parasites, slowly feeding on their energy and hard-earned credits. I mean, it's really hard to think about bigger picture issues like the struggle between the dark and light side and the cosmic force, or partaking in elections in a democratic system when you can't even step outside your door without getting involved in a blaster fight, or fly into orbit without a bunch of uglies trying to take out your subspace thrusters. So why does this happen? Why are there so many bandits, thugs, and pirates in every corner of the galaxy, especially on sparsely populated worlds? Well, if you ask a core region politician, they might say it's because it's a lack of education. Maybe these are just deviant people. Maybe they lack morals and we need to destroy them. But I've always seen that as kind of a short-term view of the situation. I mean, yes, a lot of these desperados and criminal scum need to be taught a lesson, and they need to feel the steel and fire of the might of the Republic or Imperial military. But there's actually very little thought given to the root causes of why people turn to crime, especially in such large numbers in the Star Wars galaxy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of these politicians who decide what's going on in the Republic government are from the core regions. And so they don't have to deal with the fallout of failed policies that contain criminal elements in the Outer Rim. And there have been nothing but failed policies when it comes to dealing with this issue of crime. Arguably, it's the government's most important task, and that is keeping its constituents safe. The Republic has failed gloriously at this, and at the root of their failure is something known as the Ruusan Reformation, which happened 1,000 years before the Clone Wars even started. This is a proclamation that occurred after a very devastating period of warfare, and basically you see the Republic demilitarize their federal military completely and remove Jedi from command positions within that military. As a result of the removal of the federal military, a lot of that funding was redirected to local planetary defense forces. This is a pretty extreme maneuver from both a political and military perspective. To just completely get rid of your federal military is a daunting task, but it's not as stupid as it seems. See, in our world, we only deal with local, provisional, or state level government and then federal government. We don't really have a planetary government. I mean, the UN is kind of toothless. They're not really capable of doing much. But in the Star Wars galaxy, all meaningful governance starts at the planetary level and then goes to the system sector and eventually galactic level. In general, smaller, localized governance is more efficient and better suited for meeting the specific needs of the local area and quicker to react to crisis, whereas larger central or federal governments can gather far more resources and share and redistribute it properly amongst multiple localities. Low population areas like the Outer Rim can enjoy much better services at the expense of more built-up areas where the population is more dense, like in the core regions, and there's more tax revenue. Or at least in theory, that is how it's supposed to work. Supporters and detractors of a strong central government have been arguing about this for years, for centuries. And it's actually one of the major political splits we see in the New Republic era, which is now being shown in the Mandoverse and the Ahsoka series. See, after Mon Mothma resigns from the chancellorship, partisanship would emerge between two specific factions. You had the centrists who were based in the core worlds, and they believed in a strong central government. Then you had the populace who supported planetary rights. Now, generally speaking, the centrists would support a larger federal military, and the populace would support something more like the Ruusan Reformation and more funding for local defense forces. One of the interesting things that happens during the New Republic era is things kind of switch or flip. The populace become more hawkish about rearming the New Republic Defense Fleet in order to fight the Imperial Remnant, whereas centrists like Senator Ziono saw the Imperial Remnant as less of a threat and accused populists like Senator Leia or Harrison Dula of militarism. Now, the populace in many ways share the same political views as the individuals who used to run the Republic. This is kind of mainstream Republic ideology, whereas the centrists, what they champion falls a little closer in line to imperial rule. It's more authoritarian, more about central control. And the truth is, neither side really had a good solution for the issue of banditry. You know, for the Republic, the heavy dependence on planetary defense forces meant that only areas that were wealthy enough were really properly funded to handle the threats in their system. The subsidies that had been transferred from the federal military to local defense forces were supplementary. They weren't actually enough to build or sustain a proper military force. A lot of these local planetary defense forces still had to self-fund. And also, just like the days before a federal police system was created in many countries here on Earth, bandits could simply just exploit gaps in between two local planetary defense forces patrol areas and just hide and lay low on uninhabited planets. A lot of these local defense forces weren't even allowed to leave their home systems to pursue, enemies or threats outside of their planetary system, and oftentimes local defense forces couldn't fly into another occupied system without some type of treaty being set up prior. In the Uradu system, for instance, you have the Outland Region Security Force, and under the leadership of the Tarkin family, they actually made deals with other defense forces to share their resources, to train together, to standardize their weapons, armor, their ships, so that they can buy and purchase weapons bulk. There were a lot of different things like that. They also, the Tarkins also negotiated an open borders treaty with a few other local systems so that they can create a larger network. What Tarkin really wanted was to just reinstate the federal military. I mean, had he survived the Stark hyperspace war, I think he would have really fallen in love with the clone army. But yeah, most Outer Rim sectors were not as rich or focused on security as Iradu was. And again, as a federal government, you can't just depend on local governments to take care of everything. Some needs, like defense, I think should be placed in the federal government's charge. And under Republic rule, the central government's presence was just simply lacking anywhere in the Outer Rim. The only people who were enforcing anything, especially in the free trade zone, were the corporations. And then again, they were only protecting their own trade routes and their own distribution centers, nothing else really. I mean, even during the so-called golden age of the Republic, a group of marauders known as the Nile essentially shut down all hyperspace traffic in the galaxy, which is a huge deal, and were even able to overwhelm the Jedi at their stronghold in the Outer Rim, the Starlight Beacon. For a federal government to be embarrassed like this by a bunch of marauders is simply unacceptable. Now, if you take a look at our own world, you see a similar trend. Generally speaking, areas with a very weak central government or just really inaccessible territory have a lot of criminals. We're talking about areas like the coast of Somalia, or in North or West Africa, in areas bordering the Sahara, or in the Darien Gap. You also have the ongoing conflict zone that is Philadelphia and the infamous Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. And so, yeah, guys, I know the ideas of anarchy and being a libertarian seem very enticing for a lot of people out there, but realize when you get rid of the central government, this is what happens to your local neighborhoods. It gets much worse, generally speaking. Now, I know nowadays there's a lot of focus in the media about interest rates, inflation, how to maintain economic growth, understanding seasonal migrational patterns for birds, and keeping down unemployment numbers. But if you don't have security, none of those things matter at all. Also, all those geese that are walking around, are they protected because they're Canadian, or is it because they're migratory? And could they potentially be a centerpiece for a Christmas dinner spread? You can't run businesses if they get robbed every other month. You won't see people spending money on things or wanting to live in an area where there is no law and order. And this is where we get to the imperial point of view, right? This is what the Empire is all about. It's about security, justice. Yeah. Darth Sidious kind of rose to power as a strongman on the waves of fear over the secessionist movement, and he maintained his power by highlighting the problems of various criminal entities in the galaxy. He called them all terrorists, even though these small groups of insurgents all had their own different grievances and reasons for fighting the Empire. You could kind of say when Palpatine lumped them all together, it also helped create this cohesion necessary for the Alliance to restore the Republic to emerge. Now, the Empire did have a much larger military force than the Republic did. This military force was free to pursue criminals no matter where they went in the galaxy, and while the Empire had great success in eliminating crime and piracy in the core regions of the galaxy, where everyone was paying attention, In the Outer Rim, they faced similar challenges. If anything, things got a lot worse. Simply put, most population centers were too small to sustain anything more than a token defense force. The Empire would spread itself thin, trying to build 1,000 different sector fleets for 1,000 different sectors. But even then, there was never enough ships to go around, and help usually arrived on scene hours too late. More importantly, Palpatine's efforts to nationalize so many industries and resources were driven by a desire to reduce the cost of his military. Now, cutting costs for the Empire meant a few different things. It meant cutting the wages for its workers, so generally the middle class got poorer, and they also used slaves. A lot of these slaves were prisoners, and so by putting your primary bread earner in jail for a long period of time, you can completely destroy a family. There are a lot of small little issues that cascade from their military first ideology. And to make matters even worse, so many other industries were actually destroyed when the Empire came to town, and they became basically the only employer. And so much of the Outer Rim and the Mid-Rim saw a decline in purchasing power and employment. With rampant poverty spreading in the Outer Rim, suddenly becoming a bandit, or a rebel actually, seemed a lot more desirable. There are no jobs, no opportunities, so why not steal? People don't steal just because they want to, or because they're selfish, or they're greedy. I'm sure some people do that, but a lot of people steal out of necessity. The pirates of Somalia mostly found their roots as fishermen, but once larger European fishing corporations started destroying the stocks off the shore of Somalia, these fishermen took to the oceans on their fishing boats looking for new ways to feed their people. And when they do win ransoms for hostage negotiations, we're talking about millions of dollars, that money is actually shared across the village they come from. It's not just hoarded by one or two people. Now, I'm not saying this is right. Clearly what they're doing is wrong. But we should be able to have a nuanced point of view where we can understand that they're committing a crime and also understand the reason why they're committing their crime. Not just because empathy is a good thing to have as a human being, but it also allows you to better assess the situation. Security and enforcement are not the only ways to tackle the Somali pirate crisis. It's also about building other opportunities and jobs for these fishermen to take so they don't have to go out and do what is arguably a very dangerous job. And as mentioned before, for short-sighted politicians who need immediate results, it's going to be much flashier and impressive for voters to see images of New Republic or Imperial or Republic forces killing a bunch of pirates. Let's be honest, that's what people want to see on the nightly news. They want to see justice, law, and authority. And that's going to be a lot sexier than, I don't know, creating a program that gives opportunity to Outer Rim world so that they can better develop their own school systems, maybe build hospitals, stuff like that can improve a person's life. I mean, if you add value to an individual's life, they might not be as reckless and careless with it. I know that's a very remarkable concept, but it might just work. I don't know. I mean, banditry is a very common profession to have. It's probably one of the oldest ones humanity has created. The act of stealing stuff from other people dates back to the beginning of civilization. And when a huge percentage of the population are partaking in that act, maybe instead of blaming those individuals, take a look at the society that you've created, the social system you've created. Perhaps there are fundamental problems that are preventing people from accessing economic opportunities, which is leading to all this theft in the first place. The Empire should have focused its economic might and consolidation towards building infrastructure in the Outer Rim and establishing more permanent settlements and population centers. If it had deployed more smaller ships rather than a few massive Star Destroyers, it could have further spread its presence and made it harder for bandits to operate in that area. The Republic, on the other hand, should have invested more resources on a federal peacekeeping force, far more powerful than what the judicials were. While focusing on economic development was very important for the Republic, it really matters how even that economic development is occurring. If you just focus on the core worlds, slowly you're going to have more and more problems building up in the peripherals, things that you soon won't be able to ignore. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.